Does that make sense? My anxiety has kept me up for over 50 hours.
Hi everybody, welcome to Mind and More, where we talk about anything that comes to mind and more. Today, I'm discussing depression and anxiety in TV shows, specifically Chris Traeger's mental health struggles on Parks and Recreation. When Chris first joins the show in the season 2 finale, he's a positive, upbeat, and likable character. He sees the best in everyone and everything, and does his best to be encouraging to the people around him. He's also in perfect physical health, and he's a great-looking guy. On the surface, there's nothing wrong with him or his life. But in seasons 4 and 5, he visibly struggles with mental health. I'm going to talk about his challenges with both depression and anxiety, why they're relatable, and what we can learn from them. Chris had previously shown signs of anxiety, and the way he goes into crisis mode after a run-in with tendinitis, which his doctor had told him was nothing to worry about. Or when he struggled to cope with his breakups with Millicent and Anne, that he preoccupies himself with activity so that he doesn't sink into a bottomless pit of despair, in his own words. But the peak of his struggle begins when Chris is training Andy for his police academy physical exam. Chris is the perfect person to train Andy because he's in tip-top shape. They're on the track field, and Chris tries to motivate Andy by asking him what he runs for. Andy says he runs for his wife, April. He runs for love. On the other hand, Chris reveals to him that the reason he runs is because he had a rare blood disorder as a child. So he stays active so that he feels strong and like that disease can't stand a chance. To him, running is a way to avoid death catching up to him. So therein is the difference between Chris and Andy. Andy is motivated by love. Chris is pushed by survival. When Chris realizes this difference, he has an anxiety attack and falls on the field. He can't feel his body and he thinks something's physically wrong with him, but it's really a psychological problem. If you're someone who's ever experienced anxiety, then you know how relatable this scene is. Anxiety attacks can be so strong that they're physically debilitating. Chris spent so much time on his physical fitness that he could have easily outrun anyone on that field. But the lack of well-being in his mind is what ended up stopping him. Herein lies our first lesson. Mental health is just as important as physical health. You can only go as far as your mind will let you. When Tom realizes that Chris is spiraling, he suggests that he sees a therapist. He mentions that every time something small goes wrong, Chris spirals like crazy. This is also relatable. Anxiety and depression are consuming. It truly feels like you can't take anything more than what you're already carrying. An anxious mind is full, while a depressed one is heavy. So anything added to it feels like a massive burden. So I can see why Chris spirals at any small inconvenience. He has no capacity to manage it with the state his mind is in. Chris then decides to take therapy. There's a confessional where he says that all his life he has tried to achieve external goals. And from this, I took lesson number 2. There is no goal that is worth paying for with your mental health. He was referring to how all his life he'd always been preoccupied with attaining goals that he neglected internal work. But from the statement about always trying to achieve external goals, I thought about the times when mental health suffers disproportionately to the payoff of attaining a particular goal. I know sometimes we have to do what we have to do, but many times we have a choice and we don't make it. If you knew that a particular thing was going to injure you physically, maybe fracture a bone or chip a tooth, would you still do it? So why do we sometimes engage in things that are going to injure us psychologically? Is attaining the goal all that worth it? While Chris is battling his anxiety and depression, he continues working and being there for the people around him. He's functioning and he's productive. This is where I see lesson number 3. Depression and/or anxiety do not have a look. If Chris hadn't told anyone he was going through it, he would have never guessed. He was just like any other person on the outside. He was working, spending time with friends, and going about his day with a smile on his face. Most times he was still upbeat. He was also still the good-looking guy who was in perfect physical shape. This is where it becomes important to move with empathy, to not dismiss anyone's struggles because they seem to have it all together. Additionally, move with empathy in how you approach people in general, because you just don't know what anyone is going through. And Chris's friends do this well. Tom never dismisses Chris, but instead encourages him to get professional help. Andy and April also take the time to support Chris and cheer him up on several occasions. I would hope we'd all be so lucky to have people like that around us. One of these occasions is Ben and Leslie's engagement party. Chris started crying during the toast, and he spent the rest of the night crying outside because he didn't want to be a bother to his friends. He's completely overwhelmed with emotion. At a time when everyone else is celebrating, he's moving around with his own personal dark cloud. He also mentions that he feels both so happy and so sad at the same time. This is another relatable moment. Depression is isolating. On top of not wanting to burden anyone with your problems, you can feel so alone because no one can ever truly understand how you're feeling. Depression also doesn't mean being sad all the time. Sometimes it means walking around with mixed emotion, both happy and sad. From this scene where Chris is at the peak of his depression, I take lesson number 4. Sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. Although Chris is going to therapy and working on improving his mental well-being, he doesn't become better overnight. Things got even harder before they started improving, and as painful as that is, it's okay. Sometimes you need to purge whatever must be purged, and it's okay if that takes time. Chris starts to get better. One of the things that initially sparked his anxiety and depression was the fear of dying alone, never having had a family of his own. He eventually decides to start a family with Ann Perkins. He sat in his discomfort until he was ready to move on. From this, I got the final lesson, number 5. To deal and not to distract. Chris didn't decide to start a family whilst he was still in the thick of his struggles and use a baby as a band-aid. Instead, he deals with the things rather than distracting himself from them. This is nothing easy, but it's worth it. You would rather be uncomfortable while making real progress than distract yourself for a while before being forced to deal with it later. Also, I'm sure it might spare some very regrettable decisions. Chris learns to prioritize his mental health and begins to manage his mental well-being better. He does, however, have a run-in with anxiety when he's expecting his child with Anne. While he's building a crib for his child with Ron, he even says that his anxiety has kept him up for over 50 hours. This is a bonus lesson. Even after your mind becomes healthier, you can still have a relapse, and that's normal. It's alright. Because after all, you're human, and this is life. If a positive, cheery, handsome, and fit guy like Chris Traeger can still have a bad day or two, so can you.